Anyway, so everybody, thanks for joining. So this month, well, actually, I'll go back. Recently, I've had a few requests to talk about the taxonomy and like metadata, and just like coincidentally, somebody that comes here fairly frequently mentioned Rick actually before he did this JFrog post. And so he said, "Hey, yeah, talk to Rick. I heard he's doing some really cool stuff. He has some really good ideas." And so I was going to approach him anyway. And then, I just got busy. And then the next day, Rick posted on LinkedIn about this amazing new, documentation site he had done at JFrog. And so it was perfect timing, actually. It was completely it was like that Google thing where you like, you're on your phone and then like you say something and then you start getting ads for it, like on like WhatsApp and Facebook, and the conspiracy theories start running. It was like completely like that. So I don't know if Rick is involved in the conspiracy or he knows who is, but yeah. So anyway, I'll hand it over to Rick. He's currently working at JFrog. And again, if you didn't see his LinkedIn post, he shared this really cool documentation site that he has at JFrog, and it really covers everything. So, it's as soon as I saw it and I had the request, like it was just the timing was perfect. So, anyway, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Gidi, for that warm introduction. Just a couple of notes before we get started. My internet at this time of day, I'm working from home, can be a little bit patchy, so bear with me. Hopefully, I won't crash out and have to come back in completely. It does happen occasionally. Regarding our new help center, JFrog, I really appreciate the positive feedback because, as technical writers, all we hear is the bad stuff, how crappy things are. So it's nice to hear that some people actually appreciate what we do. Maybe just an introduction, because I actually don't have an introduction slide in the deck. So my name is Rick Teplitz. I am currently the team leader for the DevOps writers at JFrog. Just a little word on that. So at JFrog, we don't have one documentation manager. We have three main groups. Each group has its own set of writers. I manage one of the set of writers, and I'm really the only manager among the writers. And I'm also what we call the guild leader, which is we use the guild to kind of try to sync and create consistency across the way that we work. The JFrog Help Center I didn't actually create it from scratch. That was set up before I got to JFrog, and they completely moved their tool set. They were doing everything in Confluence previously, and now we're doing things in Polygo on the back end and FluidTopics in the front end. And so I just did a complete refresh of that. I'm not going to get into it, but just as I mentioned, and just give me 1 second to mute. Yes, my wife is very vocal in the background, so I've asked her to go somewhere else. You'll have to apologize. I have to apologize for that. You'll have to forgive me. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now that I've given that little bit of background. I might have to turn off my video if I feel the internet is getting weak.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, feel free. I don't see anything yet. Here it's gone. It's gone. There we go. Something's happening.
Hold on. Can you let me know when you can see my screen?
Not yet. Not yet. Here we go. Here we go.
All right, I'm just going to put in the slideshow. And just one last note for housekeeping. So I'm working off my laptop, and my camera's here, and I have a bigger screen here. So I'm going to be looking at the screen most of the time, although I will try to look over at you all as I'm going through the session. So we have come together to discuss metadata, taxonomy, and generative AI. I'm speaking primarily of my experience, which started at my previous company at Imperva when we decided to build an HTML-based help center. Up until that point, we were we first in FrameMaker, and then we moved to Author.it, and we were creating PDFs, and our PDFs were hosted on an FTP server behind a username and login, which isn't really great for your users. And so at some point, we realized that we had to move to an HTML-based website. We chose Zoomin at that point for that, and really my foray into this entire subject started there when we were setting up the Help Center. The first thing that we needed to do was set up a taxonomy. Great word. I've heard it before, didn't really know quite what it meant. And so I dived down into the rabbit hole and tried to figure out over the course of a few weeks, a month or two, as I worked with some of their team to define our taxonomy. With that introduction, we're just going to be taking a look at metadata. What is metadata? What is taxonomy? And bridging the two of them, defining and applying them in tools, and also speak about the relationship with generative AI. And we'll see throughout the course of this session also a few examples of where you can view that metadata and how it translates into taxonomy. And in the end, we'll have some time for questions. So what is metadata? Metadata is really just a set of data that describes, it's a set of additional data that enwraps any object. So let's say, for example, you have a video that you upload to YouTube, right? So you have your MP4 file, you upload it to YouTube, and then you can add additional information or encapsulate that file with all this different information, whether it be some of these things come from the systems, for example, file size. Some you probably add separately, for example, maybe a keyword or description. But it's really just data that wraps whatever file it is and provides additional details for consumption. In the past, primarily it was used for human purposes. As we can see here, this is the properties page, I think, of a Word document. We can see all this different metadata that's here. We could add tags if we wanted to. It has different dates about it and the people that have been working on it. Although today it's extended now to be a core part of generative AI, giving that information to the engines that go and parse this information. So the data that wraps objects with the data, and there's different types of metadata. There's structural information, for example, a title, which is telling you how the information about directly about that item. There's descriptive information, which is for example, a description that you might read. Let's say if you go to Netflix and you're searching through their library, you're looking for something to watch, so they provide all this different descriptive information to give you input on and help you assist in making a decision on what you want to watch. And there's administrative metadata such as the author or the date created or updated, or the object type for that matter, as we mentioned. And metadata is applied in different ways and called by different names such as properties, tags, labels, and taxonomy is a little bit more of a specific implementation of metadata. So what is taxonomy? So taxonomy is really a language that describes your offering, right? So when I first started putting together the taxonomy at Imperva, I had to think about what are the ways that we described our offering, as well as our documentation, as well as how would users search for content, or how would they want to filter or drill down on that content. So you can have, for example, in your taxonomy categories such as your company's product names. You can have audiences, your audience or user types, your personas, for example. Let's say you have different documentation for different personas, maybe one for a DevOps engineer, another for a software engineer, a third for product managers who might read your documentation and so forth. It include your version numbers and your version conventions, things such as supported deployment types, self-hosted, cloud, and hybrid. And this is really the way it enables you to categorize your content, and we'll see that you then go and apply this metadata, which is your taxonomy. A taxonomy is really an organized set of metadata that describes your product, your offering, or whatever it is that you want to wrap it with. Content types, for example, is something that I often use. Some people say, well, the content type, we're on the internet and everything's searchable, and maybe like calling something, administration or administration guide is old school, although it's important that users know what kind of content. Maybe the word guide itself might be problematic, but the other aspects of it are things that help users understand if the content is relevant to them or not. And then there can be, whatever really you need in order to incorporate a proper or good representation of your offering to customers and allow them to view it and identify it, right? So what the bridge between metadata and taxonomy. So while taxonomy is the language used to describe your offerings, Metadata is the mechanism used to apply that language to content. It adds important contextual information that allows easier visual association when displayed. So in some of the examples we'll see that we have data labels and topics, and so users at a glance can know if this is content that's relevant for them, if it's the product, if this topic is on the product that they're looking to understand, or if it's for their deployment type or whatever labels we decide to apply. It enables filtering based on that language. So again, if I come to a help center and I do a search for configuring authentication and I want it to be for a specific product, I should be able to filter by that product, which will then reduce the scope of the filter out of the search results to only what is tagged with that metadata. It provides easier switching of context type or context between different products, so you can move from one to the other easily and understand, that process that you are doing, where you're moving from and where you're moving to. And very important categorization both for human and bots. And a lot of what we talk about, pretty much everything that we talk about today, or 95% of it up until last year, the year before, 2, 3 years ago, was oriented towards human users, right? But us as technical writers in the era of Gen AI, we have to be aware that we have another user, which is just as important, which is the Gen AI bots that are going through and parsing and trying to understand our content so that it can better serve answers. So when we're applying metadata to content, that metadata is also identified by the bots and helps them understand if it's relevant or not for whatever questions it is they're trying to answer, or whatever information that they are putting together. So aligning context with a taxonomy, this is a use case, right? And I'm taking a look at Imperva. So we needed a taxonomy for our new documentation portal, as I'd mentioned. We defined it based on product offerings, versions, deployment types, and more. And then we expanded our portal to include knowledge base articles from our support team and our customer community. Now, all that content was hosted on separate platforms, right? So our customer community was by a third-party provider called Higher Logic, and our knowledge base articles were hosted inside of Salesforce. But we had merged the search, or we had configured our search to go out and call the content from these two platforms and pulled into our help center. But it was very important that the same terminology and language that we were using for our content in the help center, which users use to filter by and that we tag our content, was also used in these separate platforms for the customer community and for the knowledge base articles. And so we had to work with these teams in order to make sure that they adopted our taxonomy so that we were applying things consistently, right? So we also built a video hosting platform. The same comment, once we were starting to add videos, we wanted users to be able to search and find videos based on this language. And we were going to be adding training and the same thing. So it was actually very interesting that as we started this content platform, it was an initiative, by our team, technical writing, to set up and just allow our content to be made public to our users and make it easier for them to find it. It actually forced alignment across all these different departments, right? So those teams needed to adapt our taxonomy in order to make sure that their content was findable on our platform the same way as our other content was findable. And it created an organizational consistency that didn't previously exist, So it's a process that kind of starts with a very basic reason, and then you understand that it really has a very big impact on your organization. So that's, again, first defining the taxonomy and then applying it so that it can be used across all these assets. And when users are searching and looking for information, and we'll look at that in a minute, they'll be able to find it. So maybe I'm going to stop here and just kind of illustrate some of this just so I don't run ahead too much. So if I'm going to actually open up two websites. I'm going to open up JFrog's and Imperva's because I think they're both good examples, and I've kind of driven to build both of them, and I understand them pretty well. On JFrog, we have a very simple taxonomy at this point. If I come here and I do an empty search, you'll see, first of all, that we have a set of filters on the left-hand side, right? So all of this is information that is applied as metadata. Specifically, our taxonomy doesn't include doc type. Ignore that for the second. Our taxonomy includes products and includes content type. And there's a third label, which you don't see here, which it is applied on the content level. And just to illustrate that, because for whatever reason, the labels aren't being displayed here, just give me a moment. So here you can see some of the metadata, right? Now, not all this metadata is part of our taxonomy. For example, we have the last updated date, which is metadata that was taken from our source platform, Poligo. But then we also have the metadata which we applied in Poligo as our taxonomy, which again, you can see is the product, right? The products is JFrog Artifactory, and the content type is user guide. So this helps users at a glance understand what it is they're looking at. And it also allows users to filter. So for example, if I came here and I searched for NPM, which I know is a package type, hold on a second, that's the documentation view. So if I come here and I do a search for NPM, and then I want to drill down further and I wanted only those subjects that relate to our product Artifactory, I can come in, I can filter. And so this is all based on that metadata, which we apply on the book level and on the topic level. If I come into a topic, you'll see that each topic is also tagged with that metadata. So when users come in, so a lot of our users, for example, I think 70 to 80% of users come from Google. They don't even come to the landing page of our help center. When they come and they land here at a glance, they can see what they're looking for. They can see that, obviously, they can see the title and they can see this metadata, which that content is tagged with. So I just wanted to illustrate that. Let's come back here. Maybe I'll stop here for a second and ask if there's any questions.
Hi, Rick. I have a question. It's Batia. Sometimes we have pieces of information which apply to multiple versions. Imagine Word, this section of the documentation applies to Word, I don't know, the last 3 versions of Word. How would you do it? I mean, if it's a single piece of information, that's easy to identify. But the minute it's like, I don't know, a range of information, it gets harder and harder. How did you address that?
So it really it depends on what authoring tools you're working with, right? Different tools have different ways of working with and applying metadata, and it's one of the slides here just to illustrate this. So for example, if I come to JFrog, to Poligo, which is what we use at JFrog, you can see that they have a taxonomies function, and we have a number of different items here, although there's only 3 that we use in our official taxonomy. And what we can do is we can come in here and we can there's really, at this time, at least in Poligo, there's only 2 levels that you can apply a taxonomy on. Either you can apply it to the book object, and then when you publish, it cascades and it tags each individual topic with that metadata, or you can apply it to a single topic. Unfortunately, you can't apply it to a parent and have it cascade down to the children, or you can't apply it to an embedded book and have it applied to those levels. But what that means is that if you're applying, if I apply metadata to a single topic, then it doesn't matter in what book objects, if you're working in topic-based authoring, which I think the majority of tools, not all of them, obviously, Word is not a topic-based authoring tool, but if you're working in Poligo, or I assume Madcapflair, or AuthorIt, or Hereto, you're applying metadata, you can apply metadata to the topic level, and so if that same topic is included in a number of different publications, it's going to get applied every time that you publish those different publications. Was that a clear answer?
Thanks. That helps.
All right. Other questions?
I don't have a question. I do have a comment, though, just but before I forget it. But no, you raised a good point about how the taxonomy kind of shaped your organization's understanding. It's one of the issues we have here. So we only have one product here, and the documentation right now, because the company grew so fast, the documentation was written based on the UI. So what you see in the UI is what you see in the documentation. And I typically hate that approach. It's not very useful usually. And so what we're doing now is looking at the use cases and trying to build the documentation around use cases. And because of the old model, or I guess actually the current model, where it's still just based on the UI, a lot of people, especially like new employees, don't understand how the use cases work. And so the documentation isn't helping them. And so by redoing the documentation and basing the taxonomy on use cases, we're kind of hoping to shape and re-educate people about how to actually use the product and what the product actually does, as opposed to just saying, here's what you need to put in this field, and good luck understanding your use case. So yeah, I would highlight that. Yeah, it's a really it's a very good point what you said about the taxonomy being able to shape the company's understanding.
Yeah,
It
and
goes beyond just documentation.
yeah, and that initial formulation is pretty important, to figure it out. It was very, very hard for me to grasp the first time around. I had a lot of trouble with it. And what categories, and again, if I come now, you saw, just to show you an example, so we saw that at JFrog, our taxonomy is very simple, right? We only have product and content type, and we have a third item, which is a hosting model, which is either self-hosted or SaaS, although we don't actually allow users to search for that for reasons which I won't get into right now. But that content is tagged as relevant if it's only for one hosting model or the other. In your case, Giddy, I mean, when you talk about use cases, I'm assuming you're talking about for different personas might have, or maybe not. Maybe you're talking about very specific use cases. But creating a taxonomy for use case, I mean, if you only have 3 or 4 use cases, that's one thing. But if you might have dozens of use cases, then you might want to consider tagging it, for example, by persona or user type, and then those specific use cases would be relevant for that. And you can see we actually do have also use cases, although we've only written up, this is something relatively new. We actually have two use cases that are published on our portal right now. And we have about 15 or 20 in the backlog that we're working on doing. So anyways, if you take a look at our taxonomy, like I said, at JFrog, it's pretty simple, right? Just products and content type. If you come and take a look at Imperva, it's crazy. And one of the reasons it's crazy, not the only reason, as you'll see, but is that we have versions, right? So with our approach at JFrog is that we don't have version documents. Most of our users are on the cloud. They didn't want us to maintain different versions for the releases, and so we always update the latest, which makes things relatively easy. Here you can see at Imperva's site. So they've got application security, which is a product category, data security, which is a product category, network security, application performance, product version. If I come up here and crack open the product versions, look at all the entries. This is their taxonomy, right? I mean, it's because we were required to create a full documentation set for every miner that went out, and it's continued on that way, I see, after I've left. But that's another category. We have hypervisor installation. We have document type, which I'd call that content type of JFrog. We have public cloud support, like Alibaba or AWS or GCP. So their taxonomy started out big as it was, and it's grown even more. So you have to look at your needs, your company. You have to understand the language. I recommend making it as simple as possible. I mean, on the one hand, you want users to be able to come in, and if they're looking for something on how to install on GCP, obviously you want to make it easy for them to find it, and that's why we use this. But sometimes filters can cause more confusion than help clear up. And I can tell you also that you have to be careful on the way that you apply it. So when I came to JFrog, apparently there were assumptions when we moved to Polygo, and they assumed the cascading effect, like I mentioned. So they assumed that if you tagged a category, it would cascade and tag all those topics below it, and that wasn't the case. And so we had a very big problem where users were coming, and as opposed to doing a search and applying a filter and only showing that content that was relevant to them, a lot of cases it would hide the content that was relevant to them, because if the metadata isn't properly applied and you apply a filter based on that metadata, then it's going to exclude those items that aren't properly tagged as opposed to include them in the search results. And it makes it very difficult for users. We had a lot of problems with that when I first arrived. So those are just kind of some of the art. Again, we're kind of, I don't want to say we're getting off topic. We're expanding into a little bit beyond just taxonomy and metadata, but just so we can all understand the implications and how important it is to define it right, how important it is to implement it. Maybe you have it well defined, but if it's not implemented properly in the tools that you're using, then that can also cause significant problems. So just be aware of that. So if I come back to the deck here, let's take a look. So we're going to take just a really quick look and suggestions on defining our taxonomy. So taxonomy should be efficient as possible, small footprint, right? Don't exclude things if you think it's important. If it's an important search model, you should more or less, excuse me, you should more or less understand how your users are searching. But don't go crazy and just create a ton of categories because you want to make sure that it's focused and that it's sharp and that it's relevant. They should be hierarchical, meaning there's a category and there's values. So, for example, we have product in a JFrog, we have artifactory, we have X-ray, we have distribution, you have versions, right? So at Imperva, we had different product versions. Actually, there were different versions. So we had our SecureSphere version, we had our DAM version, we had our WAF version, as an example. So you should have, it's much like we saw in Polygo. It's pretty depending on your tool, but it's pretty easy to define, right? So here we have the category and then we have the values, right? And so I come and I drop these values, or we drop these values on the topic around the publication, depending on how we want it to be applied. All right, hold on a moment. Identify attributes that define and categorize your offering. So that's, as I mentioned, sit down and try to sketch it out. Just create, in like a bolded list, a multi-level bolded list. You can put down your categories and add the entries below that, and just try to look at it and see if it makes sense and talk to people in your organization. But as I mentioned, right, I mean, the taxonomy that we set out in the beginning for very simple purposes in Imperva turned out to create a baseline across the organization, across everything pretty much outside of marketing. Marketing is kind of their own world. So, and most of what I talk about is from my experience, which is more small to medium-sized companies. When you get into very large companies like Google or Microsoft, they have their own mechanisms, and I just think they have entire teams dedicated to this. But we're really, when we talk about it just in a general sense and creating a taxonomy, it's if you're creating it, then you're probably working for an organization that doesn't have it yet. So identify values for each of those categories, and also identify how you'll handle when you're working, for example, if you're looking at setting up something like a help center, you're also going to have to define your processes for end-of-lifing content. And so that's also going to be part of not necessarily the taxonomy, but it's just something that's good to keep in mind. And then, as I mentioned before, review with key stakeholders to get their approval and make sure it makes sense. People who know the product, sales, support guys that work with customers and that know the product well. Then you need to tag your content with the taxonomy. And so, as I mentioned, every tool is different. Tools that are used for including metadata for taxonomy vary from platform to platform. So as we just saw, Polygo has that little taxonomy manager panel, which is pretty convenient. Flare, from what I understand, because I don't really work with Flare, but I understand you put taxonomy values into category or keyword mechanism. In Markdown, you actually add the tag inline somewhere inside of your content. So there's not really a proper taxonomy manager. Definitely not in pure Markdown. Maybe some of the other tools, I don't know if Gitbook or README or things like that have a Markdown-based content management have tools for managing taxonomy. I don't believe they do. In Author-it, you'd create a list variable, and then you'd apply that variable to the books as needed, and apply the value for that variable to the books as needed. In Hereto, if I'm not mistaken, you apply taxonomy based on the data map, which is actually convenient. So as I mentioned in Polygo, you can't apply it to a section heading and have it cascade down. You can only apply it to the book level. But in Data, apparently you can't apply it to detail maps at any different levels. So you can just apply it to a category in Hereto. I was shown that during a demo. So you have to look at your tool and figure it out and consult with your vendor to understand how to best work with it, and that content is going to carry over when you publish. It doesn't matter what your tool is. If you're spinning up a website from your natively inside of your tool, whether that be, for example, Polygo can create its own HTML help center, or Markdown, you can create something and an HTML website and spin up an AWS S3 bucket and then have your IT team make that available to your customers. It's just something you have to keep in mind. So you need to understand the technicalities of how it's both applied in the source as well as how it's used in the front end. And every tool is different. So I can tell you, for example, that before our last redesign of JFrog, which is what Gidi was talking about in the beginning, we had the metadata there, but we weren't displaying it in the labels, right? We had to, once we did the redesign, you can even see it's not properly displayed in all locations right now. This is just the general search results, and it should be here. But if I come here, which is pretty much the same output, users do see those taxonomy labels appear on the entries inside of the results. So you have to understand how that carries over and how it translates. You have to, if you're working with a different tool for authoring versus delivering your help content to users, like Zoom-In and Fluid Topics are what they call content delivery platforms. You have to understand how that interaction works and make sure you're applying it properly, both in the source tool and then displaying it how you want in your target tool, and have that work, right? All right, let's see what's next here. So that's defining your taxonomy we talked about, tagging content. I do just want to illustrate, in addition to what I've already showed you inside the Help Center, to show you all the metadata, right? So now we understand the difference between metadata and taxonomy. So taxonomy is just an organized way of a subset of data, really, that defines your content. So let's say if I come here, you can see that we have metadata inside of our content. This is something that right now we have a configure that only administrators can see, but you'll see that when I'm here inside of my content in this topic, for example, these are every topic is represented by a URL. And so this topic here, I can come here and I can say, hold on a second, where's my show my metadata? I'll have to hold on a moment. So if I come into here and I come and I say, I want to take a look at the topic metadata, this is all the metadata that's put out. A lot of this is carried over from Poligo. Very little of it is actually defined by me and my team, right? So, we have the taxonomy, for example, the content type and the products. You can also see them listed here. The creation date is something that's carried over from Poligo. That's something we actually want to apply to our topics, not the creation date, but the last update date so that users know when was last updated. We have a little bit of a bug there, so therefore it's not being displayed right now. And you have some content, other content which can help, for example, with context-sensitive help, right? So Poligo uses a function called xinfo. There's a special tag for it that you can then use and leverage that in a mapping file so that you can have your R&D team, when somebody clicks the help button inside of your UI, that will then identify and locate and open up a specific topic. And as opposed to being based on a URL, which can change, it's based on backend metadata, which is always carried over with the topic, even if the title or the URL change. But this is all different types of metadata. You can see here that, like I said, has been sent over from, most of it's been sent over from Poligo. The FT is Fluid Topics, so all this is actually generated by the Fluid Topics platform itself. And so you can see that this is all metadata that provides context around the object that is contained within. So this topic is wrapped in all of this data and allows us to see a whole bunch of details. I could theoretically expose every one of these data points as labels inside of the public content if I wanted to. Obviously, I don't want to. I only want to expose a very limited amount. But that's, I wanted to illustrate that there's all that metadata that's very deep down inside. All right. Coming back to the deck, let's see what else we've got here. So a few words on generative AI. So as I mentioned before, much like for humans, metadata is very important for providing context for generative AI. My organization, I think like 98% of organizations out there are currently in the process of trying to create some type of generative AI service to accompany our product to our customers. I am working with the gentleman that's leading that project. He's working across different teams, and we're encountering all these different issues. So he's trying to identify, for example, what content is relevant. They had a problem, again, as I mentioned before, because of the way that our content was structured, that they couldn't even properly find content, and we had to do what's called a refactoring of all of our content in order to make it more findable, both for, again, human users as well as for the bot. And once we went through and we did this massive project, all of a sudden content's become more findable. But really everything you do for a human service is a bot too. Bots, just like humans, need context. They're going to take over the world and think for us. And because they're built by us, they also think in a similar manner to the way that we do. That's how they've been programmed. They've been programmed by humans, right? So much like for humans, the metadata provides important context for generative AI. The tagging of the content helps reduce the scope and focus on what's relevant. So when a bot comes and scans all of your content inside of your help center, it's going to look at the URL, it's going to look at the title, and it's going to look at the metadata, and it's going to look at the content. And so the more clear all of these elements are to it, the better or more accurate the answers it's going to be able to provide. And that's not, by the way, only relevant to the metadata. Also look at titles for your content, right? When you're writing content, each title should be unique and intuitive to human users. If you don't want customers coming to a help center and, for example, we had this problem where they were using a inline title called overview, and you go and you do a search for the help center for overview, and you'd get 450 results. It doesn't help anybody find information if it's not intuitive and unique. So just keep that in mind in general with titles. So in any case, the tagging itself, with the taxonomy, helps reduce the scope and focus on what's relevant, both for the bot and for the human. The humans use that in what they call those search facets, which are the little buttons on the side of the search. Using a predictable taxonomy helps generative AI serve more accurate answers. Once it's organized and set, then it makes it much easier for the bot to go and sort that content. Packaged content like PDFs, by the way, also contain metadata, which is also parsed by AI, right? If you open up a PDF, I don't think I have anything here that I can open up quickly without and share with the class. But if you open up a PDF just like you do Word, and you look at the properties, you'll see all the metadata that's included there. And so, just as a note, when you have these frameworks like RAG that are used for generative AI. I forget what RAG is the term for it, but it's really the engine that's taking all this information and parsing it as part of preparing the generative AI. It can take that content, whether it be from a PDF or whether it be from Microsoft Word or whether it be from an HTML page. So be aware of that. That's something that's a good thing, obviously. So that's why these systems, the robust systems, you can just dump everything in there and it goes and searches it. Of course, if you have a lot of older, outdated content, or if you're including content that's not maintained, for example, in Confluence, I know at my previous company, we had a lot of content in our internal Confluence which wasn't maintained, and yet support wanted to plug that into their answers. And it's not a surprise that not all the answers were very effective because it was based on a lot of content that just wasn't relative. Other aspects to remember when writing for both human and bots is use clear, intuitive, and unique titles, which is something I just mentioned, and use structured authoring, right? Topic-based authoring is important when you want to write for generative AI. Again, it makes it easier for the bots to parse and understand the information. AI chunks content as part of its processing, so when you've pre-chunked it in a logical way, it makes its job easier. So with that, I guess that's it. I mean, I've been talking a lot. I haven't opened up the forum yet, and I know that still got a little bit of time yet. But metadata and taxonomy are complementary. I think hopefully it's a little bit clearer what both of them are and the interaction between them. So metadata again is just the descriptive information that wraps an object, and then the taxonomy is what you decide to take and to describe your product or feature set. They're important tools that help provide context to human and bot users. Having a well-defined taxonomy is important to make content consumable. And if you work in a small or medium organization and you don't yet have a proper taxonomy, it might be a good idea. It's just to start to try to to define one and consult with users. And if you have the tools, maybe even try to apply it. It's going to serve you, moving forward. And it's critical for drill down systems that have a lot of content. So for example, again, when you're in these platforms, I think like Imperva, in JFrog, we have somewhere in the range of about 10 or 15,000 topics. And in Imperva, they have, 50 or 100,000 objects. So if you cannot, if you don't have a mechanism that helps users drill down on content, then it becomes tricky. Some of the smaller platforms like Gitbook, or again, some of these smaller READMEs, which are great for small startups. It's not quite as relevant. You might only have one or two products, and the search is very good because all the content is in there. But as you expand and get to a larger level and become more enterprise ready, you're going to need to create those definitions and propagate them and share them and try to get everybody on board and align across your organization. Questions?
Rick, it's Batya again. I loved what you said about marketing, that they're their own terminology. So how did you go about it? Did you ask sales and support and use their taxonomy? Or did you come up with what it should be and get them to buy in?
Yeah, actually, that was kind of the same question I wanted to ask too. Like, so beyond just the technical and like the executive aspects of it, like how did you realize that you had a taxonomy issue at like Imperva or JFrog? And then how did you go about defining it? Like did you? I mean, I think you mentioned along the way you consulted users, but like what else did you do to define? Like this is the metadata I need. This is the taxonomy we want to go with.
All right. So how did I start? It started, as I mentioned, when I was in Pervin, we started setting up the help center, the Zoom Help Center. Probably the first task was they asked me to define a taxonomy, and I didn't really know what I was doing. So that's where it started with, and that's where my whole learning path continued from. How did I define it? Between me and you all, us as the technical writers, as the ones that categorize and structure and put information together, I defined it, right? I understood what types of items, and I also worked in support and Imperva for a year and a half. So I understood what our offerings were. I understood what the structure was. Nobody had a clue what taxonomy was. I had asked like one or two people inside of the organization if they had any recommendations. I had consulted with support. Nobody wanted to, I don't want to say nobody wanted to be a part of it, but no, everybody had other things that were keeping them busy. I just kind of fleshed it out and consulted with Zoomin. I think it was Katriel Reichman. If anybody's ever worked with him before, he's the one that helped me in the beginning to kind of define that. And then as part of the process of expanding, as we started to try to onboard content, because my objective at Imperva was to have all answers available from a single search, right? So even though we had these external platforms, we had configured a search that would call content from these other platforms, and then we had to align that taxonomy so that users would be able to search and find those answers. And so when I came to JFrog and I saw what the taxonomy was, which also, I mean, right now it's not complicated. Before it wasn't complicated either, but the logic was broken. Like there was like a general category which had items that should have been, that didn't really belong, and users, there wasn't a logic to it. So we had to make some tweaks. And then once we made those tweaks, we had to republish everything. And that just created a little bit of better alignment. And I can also show you it's not dramatic, but that also helps us see the results. So for example, in these content delivery platforms, they have analytics. And so, for example, I can take a look and I can see what users, for example, were filtering on, right? So just as an example here. So you can see, is it dramatic? Does it provide us a lot of insight? Not necessarily, but it does help us. So we can see, for example, for the source, most people are searching for documentation and troubleshooting. Product types, we can see what our most popular products are. And at JFrog, this isn't surprising. Artifactory is our flagship product, and X-Ray security product is the up and coming young competitor. And then content type is interesting. We've seen this across the board. These help centers, first of all, are massive traffic draws, right? The jfrog.com/help has dramatically larger amount of hits and traffic than does the jfrog.com website. And that's how it was in Imperva as well. And the biggest traffic draw is REST APIs. I mean, you can see release notes is way down below, but it gives us insight into what people are searching for, because people are applying these filters in order to drill down on content. So I did that, Batya and Gidi, did that answer your question?
What answered my question is that you came from support. So you use the support terminology. That's easier to get buy-in than coming from documentation and having to convince support. So
well, I have to say, hold on. I have to say, honestly, I don't think that support contributed in any way, shape, or form to that. I think all the knowledge that I used for creating this taxonomy, I had gained through managing the documentation, and support was just the added cherry on top. But
actually, yeah, I actually, when you said support, I agree with what Batya said. Because the support mind, I actually, before I started in technical writing, I was doing support, and the support people, because they're, they're in the fields, in the fire and everything, they tend to know how customers think, what they're looking for. CS might also be another example that you can approach. It depends on how the company's set up. So for here, like at Island, we don't really have a CS team. We have SC, sales engineers who do everything. And so they know exactly what companies are looking for. And so when I had to consult them about our taxonomy here, because we're looking to redo our documentation site, I'm actually approaching them and speaking to them and trying to figure out what customers are actually doing with the product, and then trying to shape the documentation around that. So yeah. When you said support, that immediately clicked. That makes sense actually. Now when you said it didn't actually help that much, that kind of killed my thought. But maybe because you were in support for a year and a half, you already had it in your mind anyway. But
yeah. It could be. Listen, and you've got to utilize. You all know your own organizations, and you know your relationship with people, and you have confidence in different levels of confidence with different people that you interact with. Use it all, whatever works for you. Just because I say that's this is my path, this is the way that I discover things, it doesn't mean that it's right. Everybody's going to be unique and different. Every organization is going to be unique and different. You might take a completely different approach, and that's fine. I mean, you need to serve your user base, your customers, and you need to know how to do that best. Every organization is different. So if you get that input from support or customer success, that's great. There's no reason you should.
I shared an article in the chat that I wrote because I've been actually researching this sort of thing. And so I listed like 7 or 8 different information architecture types. And like at the bottom, there's like a little table that says what the advantages are, what the disadvantages are, and what the use cases are. So if that helps anybody, but yeah, it's because again, it's an interesting topic, and going back to what you said in the beginning, again, it can really reshape how your company thinks of the product. Because so many people, especially young companies, young startups, where they don't have proper onboarding, they send new employees to the documentation site and say, "Hey, just read the documentation." And so, if you can get the taxonomy right there and explain how the product works, it really can have an impact in the company.
Rick, I have a small question.
Go ahead.
I have a small question about your categories. Are any of them role-based? Like role-based permissions, meaning only if a user is a specific type or a specific permission, they can actually see those categories and access that documentation, or is everything open to everyone?
It's a great question. At this time, everything's open to everybody. We also don't have, even though these, the content delivery platforms have role-based access controls, meaning you can have content that's only behind login, for example, and then in this case, if you're logged in, then it knows what your role is and only shows you that content that's relevant. We haven't structured our content in that way. I've done some research into our different personas and trying to understand if that would help. At this point, as an organization, my organization has a different problem in that some of the content has been spun off and isn't all in the same silo. That's a whole different problem. So we have, for example, 5 separate websites where content is maintained, and that doesn't help anybody find information because most of them only know that 1, maybe 2 of them exist. So that's less of a priority. But if you can organize that way, I know that there are companies that do, and it reduces significantly the noise for those users. So if anything you can do to reduce the noise and only give the users information that's relevant to them is going to make their experience better.
Yeah, true. But it's also it's a bit of a headache to maintain.
It's
So,
yeah, it's all a headache to maintain, I mean, that's, for example, we had talked about them we have different license models for our subscription licenses. So we were, when they were putting together the generative AI, they were using a model that I have this subscription and I want to use this feature, but we don't tag our content with our license models. And to do so is very risky because every organization I've ever worked in, licensing models changes every 2 to 3 years. So to have to go through and completely reset your tagging for licensing across tens of thousands of topics uh, is not trivial, not to mention you have to constantly maintain it and update it.
And
So
also the salespeople do crazy stuff with contracts. So, you may have licensing for this one, and then this was a very strategic customer, so he got a different license. Yeah. I imagine if we did that here, the headache for me no, it'd be a nightmare.
yeah,
It's
that's
not
it.
worth my $1 million shekel, a million shekels a month salary. No, no.
And also
I have a
keep that in mind.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I had a question for Rick. You said that you had to do a major refactoring when you started working with generative AI. What kinds of changes did you need to make for that purpose?
Okay, so the refactoring wasn't just for the generative AI. When I first came to JFrog, as I had mentioned, we had a couple problems with architecture and taxonomy. So I told you about the taxonomy problem, which was that assumptions were made on how to apply it. The second problem was that they had migrated from Confluence to Polygo. And so when that migration took place, they carried that over. They didn't do any type of re-architecting of the content. So what would happen was you would have a single topic inside of Polygo with a single title, but in there you would have another 8, 9, or 10 subtopics on the page. Yet none of those subtopics had their own URL. They were all considered part of that single page. And so when users would come and they do a search on the help platform, the information might or might not be, like, say, 6 or 7 or 8 topics down, but the title they're being displayed first off in the search results are completely unintuitive because it's not the actual topic that contains that content. It's the parent topic. And so they weren't working. Basically, what that meant was they weren't working in a topic-based environment, right? And that's also important for generative AI, but that's also it's important for good maintenance. So really, the refactoring was primarily served to resolve those issues where users just couldn't find answers, right? And as an additional benefit, once we started this project and I started talking with the guy that was leading the generative AI project, he was having the same problem. Again, the same problem that the humans were having, the bot was having. So the bot was going and finding this topic, but it wasn't finding the relevant content because it was buried with all this other content. So the refactoring or the re-architecting that we did was primarily one to spin off individual topics each into their own entity. Two, for those topics that needed it, we needed to give them better titles because, as I mentioned, a lot of the titles were generic. You're in a section on something and it says, configuring encryption, and you might have configuring encryption or 6 or 7 different products, right? So the results weren't that intuitive. Now it might help if you had metadata applied in a taxonomy and showing the label for that product, but it's still not intuitive for users. Users come, they see the search results. Most of them are blind, and if they're not spoon-fed exactly what they expect to see, then it's not going to help them. In the end, they're going to open up a ticket with support. So, yeah. Did I answer your question?
Definitely. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Can I just hop in and Rick, first of all, I want to thank you for this. This was great, and Giddy obviously for organizing. And without taking away from what you said, but I think we kind of have a tendency to think that AI is going to solve all our problems. First of all, no, not every AI works the same. And secondly, exactly what you said, like it doesn't take away the human side of it. That is what we give the AI. That's what it's going to work on. So in the same way, like maybe that we've always worked on like structure and title names, it's exactly the same thing in the world of AI. If we give it, there's something like overview. Again, I'm being extreme. Nobody should use overview today, but if you use that like 10 times, it's not going to help anybody when the overview topics come up in the search. So that's good. But again, thank you very much, Rick. It's always good to hear your thoughts and and insights, and it's been very enlightening for me.
Glad to be here, and I appreciate everybody joining. We only have a few more minutes left. Do we have any other questions? Anybody want to bring anything up? Comments?
Yeah, Rick, can you talk just a little bit more about the tool flow you're using to generate the site?
All right. So our stack right now, we're using. Well, first of all, these content delivery platforms like Fluid Topics and Zoom-In, their advantage is that they can consume output from a number of different tools. They just build a connector and they can, take content from Microsoft Word documents. They can take it from Clear. They can take it from Author. They can take it from Polygo. Our main tool for writing today for the technical writers is Polygo. And then we also have content that is written in Markdown. We have a couple of teams that are working with developers and they're working in Markdown. One of those, as I mentioned, is one of the spin-off silos, which is very painful because users are looking for content and they're not finding it. So we've built a connector for consuming Markdown, and we're working on onboarding that content to our main help center so we can close off the other silo. But so right now our authoring tools primarily are Polygo and Gitbook actually, and Gitbook is using Markdown on the back end. Although we are considering other tools, I don't want to talk about that because it's a little bit off and it's a little bit premature. We're looking at different options, and then for the front end currently we're using Fluid Topics. So they had when I was in Parava, I went and found Zoom-In and we implemented Zoom-In. JFrog actually consulted with me before choosing a tool, but in the end they chose Fluid Topics, and so JFrog is using Fluid Topics as their front end.
Yeah, thanks.
Other questions? No? All right, Gidi, I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to thank you again, Rick, for taking the time to do this and present everything. So no, it was great. Again, taxonomy, it's a really important topic, and actually quite a few people asked about it. So I was glad I came across you, and then your website. It was perfect timing. So it was
Glad to be
it was bound to be.
Anybody that wants a copy of the deck, I'm going to have to put it in a different template because that's actually a JFrog template, but I'm happy to share a PDF of it just as long as you use it for yourselves, right? So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. I'm Rick Tepp on Twitter, although if you want the file, I suggest LinkedIn, and I can share it there. All right?
Thanks. This was excellent.
Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, take care, everybody.
Back to the dungeon.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.